Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining. So today's Ironside Take30 for BI is going to focus on the natural language Q&A feature in Power BI. Michael Vollmer is going to lead the discussion. So he's gonna introduce the Q&A feature, talk about the Q&A visuals, a way to enhance them called Q&A tooling, talk about some best practices and limitations, talk about permissions, and then we'll open it up for questions. Certainly, as you have questions as we go through the presentation, put them into the question box and we'll answer them as we go. So the poll is about your use of AI features like Q&A in your current BI platform. Looks like most folks have a tool that has these features, yet they are still on the list to get to, right? We haven't explored them yet. Okay, thank you very much for that. All right, so just a quick reminder of upcoming events. So today is focused on Power BI. Next week is a comparison of leading cloud BI technologies. And then after that, two Cognos-related Take30s, first on upgrades, and then the second one is a deeper dive into dashboards and data modules, which was a request from all of you. And just wanted to remind everyone again about the Take30 one-to-one. We've had some great conversations with clients in the one-on-one, so we certainly invite you to join up if you've got questions or want to talk about just about anything. All right, so why don't you take it away?
I will. All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Michael Vollmer. I'm Senior Consultant at Ironside, and I want to thank everybody for joining today. All right, so we've got some really neat topics to talk about. One of my favorite features of Power BI is this natural language Q&A, right? And so what natural language Q&A does, it allows you to literally just talk to or type in to your Power BI report and ask it for data. And then it presents graphs based on the questions that you ask it, right? So you don't have to necessarily know your data or how it's laid out. You can simply ask questions such as, what customers had the highest sales last year? Show me the top 10 products for a certain customer in a certain year. What are the year-over-year growth? How are new stores doing in a certain region? Whatever it may be. Now, again, it's a very nice feature that's built into Power BI. And one of the best features is that it works in the mobile, okay? Now, this is where I see that a lot of people would want to use it. We're going to show you a little bit of what the mobile looks like. And I think you're going to be very excited about it because, again, it's nice to be able to have that mobile app and just being able to ask questions, okay? So Q&A visual basically, and again, it is a visual just like any other visual in Power BI. It consists of four components, right? And we're going to see that in a second. There's the question box where you simply type in the information you're looking for. And then there's a list of pre-populated questions to kind of help get you started. And then there's icons to modify the settings or to save that visuals or whatever it is that it returns to your dashboard or to your report, right? So again, we're going to look at this right now. So here's a little quick demo of kind of what a Q&A looks like. So you can see that it had some preset questions and you're typing into a Q&A box, just general questions, right, based on the data. And if you notice, as we click through the chart or as the chart clicks through, it interacts with the rest of the content in your dashboard, right, or in your Power BI report. So this one, I guess, is on video game sales. But again, you can see that it starts off with some predefined questions. And then again, whatever questions you ask out of your data, and again, it does kind of like Google, right? It pre-generates or auto-generates some questions based on how you start, as you start to type, okay? Now again, this is out of the box. It's one of the great features of Power BI. Now, additionally, I want to show you this. I think it's really neat. This is a screenshot from the mobile app. Okay, so if you have the mobile app, you can use this, right? If you notice, it's got little microphones. You can actually talk to it. So if you're on a sales rep, maybe he's on the road, he's out of the territory. Instead of having to pull a bunch of reports, whatever, he can actually just ask the information, just like you would in Google. And again, but it's your data. And so here's an example where they ask, what are the sales average by unit, right? And then you got a nice little card here that shows you basically what it is. And so there's a continual conversation here. As you can see, it streams down the mobile app page. So you can scroll back up and see the previous question content, right? So now we're looking at the same information by time, and then again, we're showing it plotted as a chart, right? So again, this is your data. It's interactive. You can type the questions in on your mobile, and you can also talk to them. So what it looks like from a mobile standpoint here is it actually does work with Siri out of the box, and additionally, and I wish I could demo this, but it actually works with the iWatch. Okay, so there is a Power BI app for your iWatch. It comes with the mobile, and then additionally, it will show you content to your watch, and then you can see there's additional graphs and some very, basic information. Again, it is a watch, obviously, but you can have this watch and you can have this information, and you can query your data, like James Bond with your watch, which I think is a very powerful feature. Okay, so how do you add a Q&A to a report? So from a developer standpoint, how do you implement it, right? And it's simple enough. It's actually just a visual, just like any other visuals, just like a pie chart or a map or whatever it is. You drag it into your report, and it's a visual that a user can use. Additionally, there's also a button in Power BI Desktop, and if you're in Power BI Services, there is an icon in the ribbon too, right? So as you add it to your desktop, whatever, you'll get a visual similar to this, which you can then type in questions. Now, additionally, as you type in your questions, right, that you ask out of the user, or that your users ask, they can, again, actually click an icon and save that to their dashboard or to the report, right? So they can actually have multiple questions they ask, and then whatever that graph looks like, they can just save it. So they don't have to know how to use the actual tool itself to generate these charts. They can just talk to it through a keyboard, or, and if you're on the mobile, obviously through voice, right? So then the other part I want to talk about is not only just how you use it, which if we have time, we'll try to do a demo, but is how do you, from a developer standpoint, how do you enhance it, right? And that is a feature called Q&A tooling. So what Q&A tooling does, it allows you to improve the natural language, right? So, there are certain phrases that you may say that are synonymous with other things. So it'll automatically use Bing to try to make some associations with synonyms, if you will, certain words. But additionally, there might be certain terminology that is company specific, right? And as your users are typing information in there, like for example, in this example, I said, we have a question of how many locations have sales over 1,000, right? Now the problem is location is very generic, so what we really should have said is how many stores or how many states, right? And so we can use the Q&A tooling to kind of tweak and help the Q&A tool itself learn, and it'll remember this information for future users, right? So we can say, if somebody asks for location, what that really means is X, Y, Z, right? And we're going to talk through a little bit of that with the Q&A tooling. So again, we can teach the visuals, right? But off the bat, it's going to use the metadata that's in your data set, okay? So it's taking your data set model, and it's taking the names of the columns in your data set, right? And additionally, it'll actually scan the data, and if you say, show me the sales for custom, or if you just say, show me sales for, a certain customer name, it actually might know what that is based on the data. Now, again, it just depends on how unique the customer name is, things like that. So we'll demo a little bit of that today. Again, the Q&A tooling is the main tool that you're going to use really to kind of help teach the tool how to learn and how to respond correctly based on the based on the information you give it, right? So real quickly, what happens is when you open the Q&A tooling object, which is just an icon on the actual visual itself, then one of the first things you can do is you can review the questions that people ask, okay? So these are not just the questions that are on the desktop, but these would be the questions like just from on the web too, right? So basically the Power BI service or mobile, whatever, it's going to say that information. I believe it's up 28 days of questions is the length that it keeps. And you can go and review all those questions, and you can go through there and you can help say, redefine and clean up some of that. I've been quite impressed, to be honest. Out of the box, it does figure stuff out on its own fairly well. But again, there may be some specific terminology to your company that it doesn't come out because it doesn't quite resolve correctly. You can go and review that, and you can teach it, and point it to the right information so that the future uses of whatever that keyword is automatically stored in the dictionary. All right. So again, you can review questions. You can just go ahead and teach it. So if you know that you can kind of pre-prime the learning of the tool, so you can again type in certain questions and have those and have it resolve those, so it teaches it as you go, right? And again, it's learning on the fly and it's storing that information in the Q&A database. And then lastly,
so Michael,
yes, yeah.
we have a question. I wonder if we might pause and see if we have an answer. So the user or the attendee wants to know: is there an extra cost for this feature?
That's
an extra license cost?
Right. No, and it actually comes out of the box. It is. It's another visual, just like another, again, like a pie chart or whatever it may be. But it actually is. The beauty of this is you have it now. It's free, right? So you obviously have to have access to Power BI. You know, I mean, you need be able to consume it, but it is free, just like anything else with Power BI.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. There's no additional licensing whatsoever. Okay, and then the last thing with Q&A tooling is how to manage terms. And again, that's just like a semi-dictionary. So again, you know, it's a key pair. So you say location only means state or whatever, vice versa, right? So as you're working with the Q&A visual object, you'll notice that there's some underlined words here, right? And so anything that's blue means that it understands what you're saying. It has been able to resolve that information and match it to metadata out of your model, okay? So I say sales, it knows that it finds sales. But if you didn't have sales in your model, maybe you typed in revenue, you know, it might not understand what revenue is, right? You would have to say, okay, that really means sales. So again, certain terminologies like that, you can make that connection, make that resolution, and it'll save it. So in this case, I typed in the word location, which does not exist in my metadata, and it doesn't understand exactly what you mean. So what do we mean by location? So you can see that it has a red line on it. And so if you click on it, it'll actually ask you, you know, what do you really mean by this? Define location. And so in this case, when you click on it, it actually brings you into the teaching Q&A box, and it says, okay, here's what we found. We found a problem. And then it comes down here, and then you can say, okay, well, location really refers to stores in this case, right? So, and if you teach it, somebody else comes along, types the same word, and they're going to automatically get stores, right? It's going to learn from previous users. And again, you can pre-prime it ahead of time by just coming in here and typing these questions in, you know, up front, knowing that what are common terminology that people maybe get wrong in your organization or misinterpret, and you kind of pre-prep the data. All right, so another thing here, this is a list of questions that have users have typed in, and that maybe the tool doesn't understand. So for example, sales by country, it didn't quite understand what it meant by country, right? So if you're reviewing the question somebody typed in, you can come in here and actually click on those questions, and you can say, you know what, sales by country really meant country name, right? And so we could say the word country is really synonymous with country name, because that's the actual column in the table, right? And then again, you kind of get a little visual of what the chart looks like now based on what they have, right? Additionally, you can pre-build questions so that users can start with. So these are they're called suggested questions. And so you can type in a plethora of questions, and the users can click on these questions and then obviously continue to fine-tune the definition or the question that they want. So here are some just simple questions themselves. You know, how many units by geostate? The user might want to change geostate to, you know, whatever, New York, you know. So, I mean, again, it just kind of gives them some ideas on where to get started. So, again, you don't have to fill these in, but again, these are nice for the users, and it helps them get started to, you know, if they don't know how to ask the right questions, right? Like, for example, what are the percent units by market share, SPLOI, by product set, right? So, again, you know, this is powerful again, and it would be customizable to your data, and you would tell it, you would teach it, like, what does SPLY mean, right? All right, so how does this really work? What's the magic behind the scenes here? How does Q&A honestly work in your data? And the simple answer is it just looks at your metadata. right? And the trick here is to define clean names in your data set. So based on the names that you give it, based on the column names that you give in your data set, that's what it's going to use to reference information, right? So one of the things you can do is you can give the names of your columns much better names, right? Spell things out, things like that. But you can define synonyms. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but when you're in your data model as a developer of building your data set, you can actually click on the columns in your model and you can define multiple synonyms. And it does some of this for you by default, but these synonyms get used in Q&A. So if we call it country, if you call it location or region, and they're all synonymous, then you can type that in. So in this case, like country name is the same thing as when I say somebody types in country name, what they really mean is country, right? Exactly, things like that. So that's, again, it's similar to the terms, but again, this is more global, that you can develop it at the metadata level itself. And so that's really powerful. Again, you kind of pre-building some of these synonyms in ahead of time, right? Additionally, when it comes to locations, you definitely want to fill in the properties for data categories. So if it's a geolocation, state, region, country, county, whatever it may be, city. So if you go through and fill that out, when people type in things, they say state, then it knows that that's a state, it knows to use it as a map, right? So some of those things, again, are real simple to do, but it's important that you understand how that works, right? And then another thing that this is sort of common, or most people might not be aware of, but you definitely want to set the row label property for a table, meaning that if what you're saying is, if you pull data from that table, what it's really going to do, it's going to set up, hey, listen, I'm going to pull in a value that's country name, right? That's really the label that defines every row in that table. Okay. Now, additionally, some other simple changes that you want to make to your model to use Q&A. You just want to spell out names, right? You want to make sure things are nice and clean and spaced, right? You don't want words jumbled together. If you have the words CTY abbreviated, spell out city, right? Spell out year, because that's how it's going to know. It's not going to be able to guess that unless you go in and put a bunch of terms and do some teaching, right? Or you could use synonyms. Try to avoid ambiguous names as much as possible. Again, it's not magic. It's going to do the best it can based on the data, right? If you do have ambiguous names, then the trick is when you ask questions, you just tell it, I want sold to date from table XYZ. So if you type in the name of the table, it'll actually prefix it with the column, right? Additionally, and these are just normal fixes you should do with your metadata period, but you want to make sure that your data types are right. So if you have something that is showing up as numeric and it should be text, or for example, year always comes in, it's number, it's automatically going to summarize that. Well, we don't summarize year, right? So year is date driven. So you would want to make sure you set that to not summarize, so it doesn't treat it as a measure, right? So little things like that. Additionally, again, we talked about this earlier, but the best practice is to add a bunch of pre-filtered featured questions to your data, right, into your Power BI service, right? So these are questions that, again, your users may ask, or at least a starting template of questions that they can then fill in and change to meet their needs, right? There's some limitations around this. So mostly the biggest one is that you have to be, right now it's not live query unless you're using analysis services or an existing Power BI data set, right, as your data source. Everything else has to be imported, has to be ran, has to be loaded into memory. So, and that's not a huge issue right now. But again, if you're doing a live query back to SQL Server and it's running on the fly, it's not, the limitation at the moment is that Q&A will not work with it, right? It has to be loaded into memory. From what I've read, that's going to change over the next few months, it's going to be available to work with live query, but at the moment, imported data only. And then English is the only language supported, but Spanish and I think French are coming out next month or two. So some things here about permissions. So out of the box, it does work, but you need to know that just like any other visual or any other report, if somebody wants to build it from scratch, then they obviously have to have build rights or create privileges on the data set, right? If not, then what would have to happen is, again, you would have to have somebody build a report with the visual in the report itself. Okay, so it's important to understand, again, it's if it doesn't exist now, then nobody can. A general user that just consumes or read-only user will have to have a visual built for them. They're not going to be able to do it on their own without actually having those permissions or that visual added to a report. And again, just like any other report, you're going to need to be a pro or a premium user. So the license, it is free, but from a holistic standpoint, you do need to have some kind of rights to obviously build reports in your environment. So this isn't any different than any other type of report that you would build, right? Again, consumers have read-only access. They can only consume it if the visual is in the report. And then this does work on the dashboards of Power BI. So if you look in Power BI, not only at the report level, but also in dashboards, there is an option to ask questions of your data. And you can turn this on and off from a dashboard standpoint so that that's not available from that data set for that dashboard. And additionally, if you want to control it at a more granular level, from the Power BI admins can actually go into the tenant settings, and they can actually specify what groups can consume or use the questions, period, right? So it's important to understand that again, you can customize this based on security. All right, now we're Scott, do we have any other questions here before we? I know we're getting time, but I want to show a little demo if we can. But
yeah, so let me run through two questions here. So first one, is this available both in the Power BI service and in Power BI desktop?
Yes, it exactly is. Again, it is, and if everybody can still see my screen, it is again a visual that you just drag in to your desktop, right? Or, and if I still have it open here, let's see. Or if you're in the actual report itself or data set, let's see if I can create a new report here. It is available as a ask a question button in the actual reporting tool, or again as another visual, right? So it is available both. And again, they sync up with the questions. So it does, again, as people ask questions, you can still monitor those questions as an admin.
Once you have defined the terms in Power BI, does that work across all dashboards and workspaces, or do you need to do that each time?
It's by data set. So when we define the terms, again, that makes sense, right? Because again, it's based on the metadata of the data set. So it is data set driven. So if I go here to manage terms, or actually, excuse me, if I go to review questions here. So I can, as I'm in here, it's actually interesting because even though I'm in just one data set, I can change and choose a different data set, but it's data set holistic, right? So these are all the data sets that are published to the Power BI service and in the workspace, right? I can switch over to I haven't really tried it with anything else, but I can switch over to those data sets and I can review those questions. Same thing with the terms, right? So so I haven't defined any terms yet, so we'll you have to teach it. But again, you would do it by data set. That's the context.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now, one thing that I want to point out too, I think I missed this in my notes, but it is going to leverage. I guess it's like any other visual, right? It's going to leverage row-level security. So if you have row-level security built in there, it's going to leverage that. If I have slicers or whatever else on my dashboard, it's also going to respond to that. So if I have a slicer and I pick a value that limits it down to a certain state or a certain time or whatever it may be, it's going to interact with this visual the same way it does with every other visual, right? So even though it's a Q&A kind of on the fly visual, it's still a visual just like any other chart in Power BI. And that's the beauty of it, right? Now, so here is a visual here just to show you an example. So again, I had typed this in a few minutes ago, but if I like this visual, let's say I'm working in this report, I can actually say, you know what, I want to keep it. And you can actually now save that visual to your report, right? So that's one way. Now it becomes a normal chart. And again, the add icon here is how you go in and you manage the Q&A tooling features to modify it. When you go into the settings, there is actually a video that you can click on and watch. And so there is some more information there. There's actually quite a bit of detail around Q&A that is much more advanced than we have time for, but you can actually build in like a data dictionary. Actually, it is a data dictionary, exactly what it is, a data dictionary that your users can use. And I actually have a example here really quickly that I'll just show you. It's called the Q&A linguistic. And so for the Summer Olympics, for example, right, I can see that I have a Q&A linguistic file, and I'll just open it up just to show you what it looks like. So it's basically a data dictionary, if you will. And again, it's way beyond context here, but you don't have to use this, but you can. If you really want to go very far with this, you can actually build a separate linguistic file that you can then import into your Power BI model, right? So if we look at that real quickly, on the modeling tab, there's a way to import that, right? And again, you can read up about this, but again, it's a little more advanced than what we want to do here. So, all right, so here's an example of something that I typed in. So we can type in some other things. Let's say that I want to see sales by year, right? And so it's simple enough. There's sales by year and we can type in customer. Let's see, it didn't find customer. Let's see what it. Let's say pursuit product. I got my model here. So if I type in product, then it's going to try to help me kind of guess what I want to type in next. So if I type, let's say, the next letter, it's kind of like Google. It's going to pre-filter that. So it knows I'm looking at product, right? And so I know that I have a product called, it starts with A, so it's giving me all the products start with A. If I type in V, the here are my products start with V, right? So if I want to do it by segment, and we could say it as table. See, I misspelled segment, but it still figured it out, right? So again, that's where it's using Bing to kind of help with some of the spelling issues. So it obviously figured out what segment was. But again, now I have it as a table, right? Or then if I want to do it as a crosstab or a matrix, and there. So again, it's very, very easy to use, and it's very powerful. And there's so much more to it. And again, we only have so much time, but it supports almost every chart. So let's see, I do sales by country as.
And certainly, one thing that I'll mention here is if you're interested in going deeper on this, finding out a bit more about it, feel free to click on our link for the Take30 one-to-ones, and we can have an individualized conversation about this feature set, on whatever timetable you wish. The other thing I'll mention here is that there was a question about these types of functionalities in Cognos Analytics, and certainly we're going to make that part of a future session, but we wanted to focus on Power BI today. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. So, everybody's talking about AI these days, and that's sort of a broad topic, right? There's a lot to that, but this is actually a AI-centric feature that's very easy to implement in your environment. Again, there's some caveats. There's a learning curve a little bit on your end, but for the most part, it comes out of the box with Power BI. The trick is, again, to clean up your data names, right? That's really what it is. There's some other caveats to it, but the biggest one is making sure your model's nice and clean and that you've got an easy model for it to understand,
Okay. So I think we're a little 2 minutes over. So thank you very much all for joining, and looking forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.